My mother just slapped me in front of the entire family because I refused to sign away my $9.7 million inheritance to my perfect sister. As I stood there, my face stinging from the blow, my sister smirked and whispered, "You were always the family janitor, Maya. Now, sign the deed and get out of my house." The room was filled with greedy eyes, all waiting for me to break. But they made one fatal mistake. They invited the estate lawyer to witness my surrender. I didn't cry. I didn't sign. I just looked at the lawyer and nodded. When he cleared his throat and asked my mother, "Do you even know who actually owns the deed you're trying to seize?" The entire room fell dead silent. My family thought they were staging a coup. They didn't realize they were actually staging their own eviction. And the janitor they just slapped? I'm the only person who can keep them from sleeping on the street tonight. The air in the drawing room of the Sterling estate was thick with the scent of expensive cigars and the sharp medical shock of a trap being sprung. I stood in the center of the Persian rug, surrounded by my family, feeling like a ghost in a house I had grown up in. My sister Elena sat on the velvet sofa, her social mask of sweetness replaced by a vantage of cold, calculated greed. In front of her, laid out on the mahogany coffee table like a surgical strike against my future, was the deed to our family's $9.7 million estate. "It's for the best, Maya," my mother said, her voice a calm resolution that chilled my blood. "Elena has the status to maintain a property of this magnitude. You've always been the janitor of the family, useful for the chores, but never meant for the glow of leadership." I looked at the lawyer, Mr. Henderson, who stood by the window. He remained silent, his face a mirror, paradox of professional indifference as he watched the status flip unfold. My father stood behind Elena, his hand on her shoulder, providing a powerful boss presence that was meant to intimidate me into submission. "I won't sign it," I said, my voice a surgical strike of defiance that shattered the room's artificial peace. This estate was left to me in a private trust by grandfather. It wasn't meant to be a trophy for Elena's social climbing. The medical shock of my refusal hit my mother like a physical force. She stepped forward, her face twisting into a mask of permanent foreclosure on her maternal love. Before I could blink, her hand lashed out. Crack. The sound of the slap was a surgical strike that echoed through the high-ceilinged room. My head snapped to the side, my cheek erupting in a medical shock of stinging heat. I didn't cry. I didn't stumble. I slowly turned my face back to her, my eyes becoming a ghost of the daughter she once knew. "You have no other choice," my mother hissed, her social mask completely disintegrated. "Do as you're told. You are nothing in this family without our permission. Sign that deed over to Elena immediately, or you will find yourself in a permanent foreclosure from this family forever." Elena smirked, leaning forward into the glow of the fireplace. "Go on, Maya, sign it. You were always just a janitor in my house anyway. Now be a good girl and give the powerful boss what she wants." The mirror paradox was perfect. They thought I was the one under pressure. They thought they held the vantage point. But I looked past my mother's trembling rage and Elena's smug resolution and caught Mr. Henderson's eye. He opened his leather briefcase, the surgical strike of his movements drawing everyone's attention. "Actually," Mr. Henderson whispered, his voice a medical shock of calm that stopped the room's oxygen. He looked directly at my mother, ignoring the hand she still had raised in a threat of violence. "Do you even know who actually owns the deed to the $9.7 million estate you're trying to seize?" Immediately, the entire room fell silent. Elena's smirk froze into a ghost of itself. My father's powerful boss posture slumped, a medical shock of confusion crossing his features. "What are you talking about?" My mother stammered, her voice a thin resolution of its former strength. "It's family property. We are the Sterlings. The Sterling Family Trust was liquidated 3 months ago to cover your failed executive package investments," Mr. Henderson said, his words a permanent foreclosure on their arrogance. "The person who bought the debt and the deed isn't a ghost or a janitor. She's sitting right here." I stood tall, the medical shock in my cheek fading into a surgical strike of cold, hard victory. I looked at my mother, then at the sister who wanted my life, and finally at the powerful boss father who had let it happen. "You wanted me to sign a deed to a house I already own," I said, my voice a sovereign command that echoed through the silent room. But since you just slapped the owner of this estate in front of a legal witness, I think it's time for a status flip you'll never forget. The mirror paradox was complete. I wasn't the one being evicted, they were. The silence that followed, Mr. Henderson's revelation was more than a medical shock. It was a permanent foreclosure on the world my family thought they ruled. My mother's hand, the one that had just delivered a surgical strike to my face, began to tremble as she looked. At the deed on the table, a document she now realized was a ghost of her former power. Elena's eyes darted between the lawyer and me, her social mask of arrogance melting into a mirror paradox of terror and confusion. "This is a mistake," Elena stammered, her voice lacking its usual vantage of authority. "Maya is a nobody. She works a janitor-level job in a mid-sized firm. How could she possibly buy the sterling debt? Because while you were busy playing powerful boss on social media with a trust fund that was already empty, Maya was the architect of the largest private equity firm in the tri-state area," Mr. Henderson replied, his voice a resolution that felt like a gavel hitting a block. He slid a second set of documents across the table, not a deed of transfer, but a permanent foreclosure notice directed at my parents. I leaned forward, the stinging on my cheek serving as a surgical strike of motivation. I looked at my mother, whose status flip from matriarch to intruder was nearly complete. "You called me a janitor, Mom," I said, my voice cold and focused. "And in a way, you were right. I've spent the last 6 months cleaning up the mess you and Dad made with your executive package lifestyle. You mortgaged this estate 3 times to fund Elena's glow, never realizing that the bank you were borrowing from was a subsidiary of my company. The medical shock hit my father then. He grabbed the papers, his face turning a ghostly shade of gray as he saw the sovereign seal of my holding company. Maya, we're your parents. We gave you everything. You can't just execute a status flip like this. You gave Elena everything," I corrected him, my words a surgical strike of truth. "To me, you gave the service entrance, the folding chairs, and tonight, you gave me a slap in the face. You wanted me to sign a deed to give Elena the vantage she didn't earn. Well, the resolution is simple. The deed is already in my name. And I'm not feeling particularly hospitable." I turned to Mr. Henderson. "Proceed with the permanent foreclosure protocol. I want the locks changed by midnight." "Maya, you can't be serious," Elena shrieked, her social mask finally cracking into a medical shock of desperation. "Where are we supposed to go? This is our home." "Actually, Elena, it's my vantage point now," I said, standing up and smoothing my jacket. "And since you think I'm such a good janitor, I've already had your things packed into industrial trash bags. They're waiting for you by the service entrance, you know, the place where you thought I belonged." The mirror paradox was devastating for them. They stood in the center of the drawing room, surrounded by the glow of an inheritance they had tried to steal, realizing they were now ghosts in their own house. My mother reached out, her eyes filled with a medical shock of regret, but I stepped back. "Don't," I said, my voice a surgical strike of finality. "The time for status games is over. You tried to force me to sign away my future while you humiliated me in front of a witness. That was your final sovereign mistake," Mr. Henderson signaled to the security team waiting in the foyer. 2 men in dark suits stepped into the room, powerful bosses of enforcement who didn't care about the sterling name. "Please escort these guests to the perimeter," I commanded, the resolution of my words echoing through the halls. "And Mr. Henderson? Make sure the ghost ledger of their debts is sent to their new address. I want every penny of the executive package they stole from the trust returned." As they were led away, the medical shock on their faces was the only glow I needed. They had come to this gathering to witness my surrender, but they had stayed to witness their own permanent foreclosure. The architect had officially taken back the house. The morning air in the city felt like a surgical strike against the luxury my sister had always taken for granted. Elena sat on a cracked plastic chair in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of the industrial district, a far cry from the glow of the Sterling estate. The medical shock of our status flip had finally settled into a cold, gritty reality. Her designer suitcases were piled in the corner, looking like ghosts of a life that had undergone a permanent foreclosure. "It's just a temporary setback," my mother whispered, though her social mask was trembling, as she tried to boil water on a stove that leaked a faint scent of gas. "Your fiancé, Marcus, is a powerful boss at his firm. He'll fix this. He'll talk to the architect of the Ether Group and get the deed back. Elena grabbed her phone, her fingers flying across the screen with a surgical strike of desperation. She had been calling Marcus for 3 hours, but every call went straight to a ghost of a voicemail. Just as she was about to throw the device against the peeling wallpaper, it buzzed with a notification from the Global Financial Chronicle. The headline hit her like a medical shock. Marcus Thorne terminated amidst Ether Group takeover. Allegations of trust fund mismanagement surface. Elena's scream was a raw resolution of pure agony. He's gone. Maya didn't just take the house. She took Marcus's career. She executed a permanent foreclosure on everything. At that exact moment, I was standing in the vantage of my new office, looking out over the skyline. Julian, my lead strategist, stepped in with a resolution report. The status flip is complete. Miss Sterling, Marcus Thorne was found to be using your family's ghost ledger to hide his own gambling debts. We terminated him for cause at 6 a.m. And the apartment? I asked, my voice a calm surgical strike. They are currently occupying the janitor's unit of a building you acquired last month. Julian replied with a professional mirror paradox of a smile. The rent is due on the 1st. There are no executive packages available for them. Back in the cramped apartment, the door burst open. Marcus stumbled in. His powerful boss suit wrinkled and his social mask completely shattered. He didn't look at Elena with love. He looked at her with a medical shock of resentment. "Your sister is a monster," he shouted, his voice echoing in the small space like a surgical strike. "She didn't just fire me. She blacklisted me from every firm in the city. She told the board I was part of a ghost scheme to defraud her estate." "But you were going to save us," Elena cried, her glow replaced by the gray shadows of the room. "You were the one with the vantage. I was the one she was using to get to you." Marcus realized, the mirror paradox finally becoming clear. She let me think I was a powerful boss, while she was the architect building the trap. We aren't the leaders of this family, Elena. We are the janitors cleaning up the wreckage of our own greed. My mother sat down on a moth-eaten sofa, the medical shock of her daughter's slap, the one she had given me now, appearing as a permanent foreclosure on her own soul. She looked at her hands, the same hands that had tried to force me to sign away my life. "She warned us," my mother whispered, her voice a ghost of its former strength. "She told us the status flip was coming. We were so blinded by the glow of Elena's wedding that we didn't see the surgical strike standing right in front of us." Suddenly, the apartment's buzzer rang. Marcus opened the door to find a delivery person holding a single, heavy cream-colored envelope. Inside was a resolution letter on my sovereign stationery. "To the family who seated me in the hallway," it read. "I hope the janitor's quarters are comfortable. Since you lost your vantage in the city, I've decided to offer you a job. My new firm needs people to shred the old ghost ledgers of the Sterling estate. The pay is minimum wage and the executive package is non-existent. But at least you'll be in the building. Just remember, you'll be working in the hallway." Elena dropped the letter, the medical shock of the irony causing her to collapse into a chair. The status flip was no longer just about a house. It was about the permanent foreclosure of their pride. The architect had won, and the janitors were finally going to work. The glass elevator of the Ether Tower ascended with a silent, lethal resolution, carrying my family toward a vantage point they had once mocked. My parents and Elena stood huddled together, the medical shock of their new poverty etched into their faces like a permanent foreclosure on their former joy. They were no longer dressed in the executive package of high society silk. They wore the wrinkled, off-the-rack clothes of people who had spent the night in a janitor's unit, haunted by the ghost of the $9.7 million estate they had lost. When the doors opened, they didn't find the sovereign office they expected. They were greeted by Julian, who led them not into a boardroom, but into the service corridor, the very hallway where they had once seated me. I was waiting there, leaning against a stack of archive boxes, my presence a surgical strike against their remaining pride. "You came," I said, my voice a calm resolution that seemed to vibrate in the narrow space. "We have nowhere else to go, Maya," my father whispered, his powerful boss posture completely shattered by the medical shock of the week's events. "Marcus is gone. The banks have frozen our ghost ledger accounts. We're facing permanent foreclosure on our very names." Elena stepped forward, her social mask finally gone. leaving only the mirror paradox of a woman who had realized she was never the golden child by merit but by my mercy. She looked at the heavy industrial shredder standing in the hallway and then back at me. "You want us to do this?" she asked, her voice a ghost of its former arrogance. "You want us to shred the documents of our own legacy in a hallway?" "I want you to understand the vantage of the person you tried to bury," I replied, a surgical strike of truth in every word. "You spent years treating me like a janitor, while I was the architect of your survival. You slapped me because I wouldn't let you steal a $9.7 million deed. Now the status flip is complete. If you want a paycheck, you start here, in the dark, where you tried to keep me." The medical shock in the IAG room was palpable as my mother slowly picked up the first file. It was the executive package contract for the very wedding that had triggered their downfall. With a trembling hand, she fed it into the machine. The sound of the paper being destroyed was a surgical strike against the sterling name. "It's better than the street, isn't it?" I asked, my voice a sovereign reminder of their current reality. "Yes," my father said, bowing his head in a final resolution of defeat. "Good," I said, turning to walk back toward the glow of the main office. "Julian will monitor your progress. Since you're so fond of status symbols, I've given you each a title Junior Archival Assistants. It's the lowest vantage point in the building. But as you told me, some people are just meant to be hidden in the dark." As the door to the executive suite closed, I saw the mirror paradox through the glass. They were working, their powerful boss dreams replaced by the resolution of survival. The architect had not just taken their house, she had taken their social mask and replaced it with a paycheck. The status flip was final. The hallway was theirs now. The night of the global summit arrived, with a glow that seemed to hum through the very glass and steel of the ether tower. This was the resolution I had spent years building while my family treated me like a ghost in the hallway of my own life. As I stood on the mezzanine, draped in a sovereign midnight silk gown, I looked down at the ballroom, a vantage point that overlooked the most powerful bosses in the global market. But my focus wasn't on the dignitaries or the champagne. It was on the service entrance near the back of the hall. There, dressed in the humble uniforms of junior archival assistants, were my parents and Elena. They weren't guests in this executive package of an evening. They were the janitors of the archives, tasked with managing the digital ghost ledgers for the summit's historical display. The medical shock of their downfall was visible in the way they kept their heads down, avoiding the eyes of the people they had once tried so desperately to impress. The status flip was poetic. Elena, who had once demanded I sign over a $9.7 million estate, was now handing out tablet devices to investors. My mother, whose hand had once delivered a surgical strike to my cheek, was now straightening name tags with a resolution born of sheer survival. They were living in the mirror paradox I had created. They were in the room, but they were invisible, just as I had been for 2 decades. As I descended the grand staircase, the room fell into a respectful silence that felt like a permanent foreclosure on my family's old regime. I walked past them, my sovereign presence causing my father to stiffen, and Elena to bite her lip in a medical shock of repressed shame. I didn't stop to gloat. The surgical strike had already been executed. I reached the podium and looked out at the glow of the audience. "A vantage point is not something you are born with," I began, my voice echoing with a resolution that reached even the service hallway where my family stood. "It is something you build brick by brick, often in the dark. Many people see the executive package of success and assume it's a gift. But the architect knows that the strongest structures are built by those who have been seated in the hallway and decided to build their own ballroom." A wave of applause broke out, but I only had eyes for the mirror paradox at the back of the room. I saw my mother look up, her social mask finally replaced by a medical shock of realization. She finally understood that the ghost she had slapped was the only thing standing between her and a permanent foreclosure on her very existence. After the speech, as the powerful bosses moved toward the gala dinner, Elena approached me under the guise of delivering a ghost ledger update. She didn't look at me with the glow of her old arrogance. She looked at me with a resolution of quiet submission. "The data is uploaded, Ms. Sterling," she whispered, her voice a ghost of the sister who had once called me a janitor. Thank you, Elena, I replied, the surgical strike of my kindness being the final blow. You've done a good job. Perhaps by the next summit, you'll have earned a seat at the table. But for tonight, the hallway is yours to manage. The status flip was complete. I watched her walk back to her station, a janitor of my legacy. I stepped out onto the balcony, the glow of the city reflecting in the mirror paradox of my eyes. The architect had not just taken the inheritance. She had taken the future.